Bernstein from Duolingo, who's going to be discussing the sort of development, application, and dissemination of responsible AI standards, and Kate McWilliams, who will discuss how ETS is approaching the ethical use of AI. So, firstly, let me hand over to Jill Bernstein from Duolingo.
Thank you so much for everyone for coming today to listen to our discussion of responsible AI. This is something that's very important to me personally, and also to Duolingo and the Duolingo English test. So I'll be talking primarily about the responsible AI standards for assessment that we've developed, but I want to first do some level setting. So this is the agenda for the talk. I'll do a little bit of level setting. I want to talk about responsible AI and professional responsibility. I want to talk about our standards, and then a few takeaways. And I understand Q&A might be after my talk or sometime after, so we can be flexible about that. So in terms of level setting, how we think about responsible AI or what it is. So AI is a technology. It's prominent in all of our lives. It's, aside from assessment, it's in the safety sensors in our cars, Google Translate, internet search, speech recognition, and customer service. And responsible AI is the practice of creating and deploying AI that's not only useful, which many of these applications are obviously, but also safe and adheres to ethical principles. And examples of ethical principles that we use in responsible AI are fairness, for example, for algorithmic bias, or security for data governance, and accountability for user awareness. And responsible AI is really necessary across domains, many domains, because AI technology is used across many sectors, as you can see here. So for education and automated essay scoring, for law enforcement, for facial recognition and surveillance, and media for fake news detection and detecting hate speech. And I put a few other examples here for you to take a look at, just to sort of create the bigger picture. And while AI is useful and it's well-intended, or applications of AI, I don't know if any of you have had the chance to read this wonderful book by Joy Buolamwini, who does work in facial recognition, but she points out very clearly, and in it's kind of a memoir-like book, very nice. She talks about her work in facial recognition. And while facial recognition is convenient for daily use, we use it for unlocking our phones. Underrepresentation in training data, which is used to build the A models, can really cause harm in high stakes contexts. So in her book and in a lot of her work, what she was able to show is that faces with darker skin have been falsely identified. And this can result in harms like false incarceration, or not being recognized by a self-driving car. So we need to keep this in mind when we're developing AI for particular purposes. We need to think about responsible AI. It's very, very important. So let's talk about responsible AI and professional responsibility. In an industry, when you're developing applications, and we feel very strongly about this at Duolingo, is that responsible AI is part of our professional responsibility. It's certainly part of the professional responsibility of the assessment community. So I'll define professional responsibility as we've adopted it, and discuss human-centered AI, and then I'll present responsible AI for assessment. And so we've adopted or embrace this definition from ISO, which is that professional responsibility aims to ensure that professionals who design, develop, or deploy AI systems and applications, or AI-based products or systems, recognize their unique position to exert influence on people, society, and the future. Which, all that to say, as developers of AI, we have a responsibility to society, because what we develop can impact a lot of people, our users. And another piece of the professional responsibility comes from the AI ethics community, which we engage with. And I don't know if you're familiar, maybe you're familiar with the Feld et al. Piece, which is a pretty widely read piece. Not that they define professional responsibility, but they include it as one of the factors in AI ethics, and or one of the attributes of AI ethics. And the factors that they use to define it or include it for professional responsibility are to ensure accuracy and scientific integrity. So if we think about that from an assessment perspective, that's AI system evaluation, or an example. Applying responsible design. So from an assessment perspective, again, test access, security, accessibility, cultural awareness. Considering long-term effects, so that would be the impact on the test takers, and multi-stakeholder collaboration. So in this context, an example might be that if you have organizational REI standards like the AERA standards or our standards, that you make them open for public comment. And then in terms of, I want to talk a bit about human-centered AI because it reflects human goals and values, and this is something that really needs to be built into responsible AI practices. And again, responsible AI embraces, or human-centered AI, which is part of responsible AI, embraces a number of ethical principles. And here's just a list of some of them. If you look through the literature on ethical principles and ethical principles in AI and human-centered AI, these are some of the common principles that you will find, but there are also a number of others. And so if we think about assessment frameworks, the assessment frameworks that have been around and the ones that are newer, these embrace ethical principles. So for instance, if for validity, Kane and Chappell, the fact that the test needs to satisfy the claims to demonstrate test taker proficiency. So validity arguments. This is an ethical principle that's embraced in testing, as well as fairness. The test should be justice-oriented and equitable for all test takers. So we're not really starting from scratch when we're thinking about responsibility, professional responsibility in assessment. And if we look at the AERA, APA, and CME 2014 standards, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, they also have addressed responsible AI primarily for automated scoring, since when they were published, that was what was around and what was used in testing. So an example is the standard 3.8, the validity of score interpretations for relevant subgroups, and sample practices that are in the standards specifically say that scoring algorithms need to be reviewed for sources of bias. And there are a number of other standards, and I won't read through all of them just in the interest of time, but you will have this recording and you can look over them later. And so I want to focus now on the Duolingo English Test responsible AI standards and practice. And I'll talk about the standards development, the rationale, the methods, the standards themselves, and dissemination. I'll provide an illustration of how we put the standards to practice. And so just 10 seconds about the Duolingo English Test to provide some context. It's a digital first, high stakes English language assessment. Digital first in that we say it's born digital, that everything that's used to create the test and score the test and security, everything is originally AI. It's AI. We use AI. So we use human in the loop AI extensively. So in design, automated item generation with human review, for measurement, automated scoring, and with using human annotation for building the training data, for scoring models, and for security, for automated plagiarism detection with human proctoring. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And so why did we do this? So the DET is an AI-powered high-stakes exam with life-changing outcomes for lots of test takers. So we know that high-stakes exams, especially language assessments, they really can impact somebody's life profoundly. Our test is used by 5,000 programs in over 100 countries. So that's a lot of people taking the test and who has high stakes. They have stakes in this process. And the responsible AI standards are needed to mitigate risks that might impact scores. So for instance, evaluating the accuracy and automated scoring of speech and writing, mitigating bias in automated item generation, and accurately detecting test taker cheating from plagiarism detection. And that'll be the example that I use when I show you how we use the standards in practice. So how do we develop these standards? We first conducted a systematic review of the literature, examining assessment standards and guidelines, AI ethics literature, AI policy literature, and the NIST AI risk management framework, which is a US national framework that's widely known, at least in the US, and accepted. And then we engaged in multi-stakeholder collaboration with Duolingo experts from across fields, so language assessment, machine learning, psychometrics, legal and security, and plus we worked with an external AI ethics expert from computer science. And then we deliberated and selected relevant ethical principles, and then we wrote and publicly disseminated the standards as a living document, which are open for public comment. And so the standards are available, and I'll give you a QR code. You can go to our research site later and get, that paper as well as others. But so the RAI standards, our responsible AI standards, are the first published in an assessment program. We selected 4 ethical principles: validity and reliability to support the test validity argument, fairness to increase access and inclusion and manage bias, privacy and security to protect test takers and item banks and provide secure test administration, and accountability and transparency to share and engage with stakeholders. And there are more details, obviously, in the standards themselves. So now we have to translate these standards into practice. So I want to talk a little bit about responsible AI framework maturity, and then I'll give an example of how we do translate, one example, how we translate standards into practice. I'm trying to be mindful of time as well. So AI ethicists ask, are responsible AI frameworks mature? So in other words, organizations can develop ethical principles, as we've done, and develop these responsible AI frameworks. But what do they do to actually operationalize these principles? How do they translate the principles into practice? Because we can all write the frameworks, but we really need to be able to apply them. And so Dotan et al., and I have the reference down there, they did this. They developed a way for, and this is just something for everybody, including us. They developed a framework for like a maturity model to figure out if companies, organizations that develop these responsible AI frameworks in assessment or otherwise actually have mature models. And so that's something to think about if you're in an organization that's thinking about developing a framework, or you have a framework and you're thinking about how to apply it. It's a highly recommended read. And so the Duolingo responsible AI standards and practices apply across our assessment ecosystem. And the ecosystem includes, of course, test design, measurement, security, and as well as the test taker experience. And so examples of just a high-level examples, responsible AI standard for validity and reliability, how does that relate to measurement? Well, I've mentioned this a few times. One example is to evaluate the AI system accuracy. And with regard to test design and fairness as the standard, to perform human fairness and bias item review, mitigating any potential bias and making sure that the item is construct relevant, right? And this is something the assessment industry has done for many, many years. It's not new, but now with automated item generation, we have different problems, different kinds of problems to solve than when people are writing items. And in terms of security, the privacy and security standard, an example is storing and using data following data protection policies. And in terms of accountability, making sure to document and disseminate how AI is used on the DET for us or your test or whatever you're writing RAI standards for. And so I want to give an example, and this will be, I'll start to close with this after the example, is for privacy and security. So we have a privacy and security standard, and the rationale is to ensure data compliance, test taker privacy, and secure test administration. And one of our practices that we use to translate the standard into practice is to offer remote human proctors protocols or guidance for decision-making to accurately identify cases of test taker plagiarism. And so how does the plagiarism detection process work? So first we have to define plagiarism. So we develop a clear definition. We have an AI algorithm for identifying potential sources of plagiarism, and also an algorithm for detecting text overlap. And these are two different things I'll talk about in the next slide. And then how do we help the remote proctors? How do we make it safe? How do we make it responsible? Well, they have interpretable outputs to help them make decisions. And they have an interface that they use that provides clear guidance to help them with that. And so as part of the, building this algorithm and figuring out what's fair, what is plagiarism, because that's pretty high stakes for people being caught cheating. It's something we really have to take really seriously. There's text overlap and there's plagiarism. Text overlap is one thing. It's just maybe you wrote something in your essay that on the test that's shared with a historical response database. It could be something very basic, right? But then there's intentional cheating behavior where test takers deliberately misrepresent a text as their own, right? And so we have to make that distinction. That has to be really, really fair, and human in the loop AI is essential in that context, especially with fairness. So at the end of the day, human proctors are the decision makers for plagiarism. Our tests are recorded. The AI systems flag the suspicious behaviors. Every test session is then reviewed asynchronously by remote proctors using a 3-tiered system. And the first tier proctors, they're the people who might identify suspicious behavior. Second tier have more security skills. And then the third tier are the senior proctors with higher level security skills. And the tier system works, as things get more and more serious. And then for remote proctoring, the proctors have an interface that they can use that shows them the similar highlighted sentences. It shows them the similarity. It shows them from a historical database of test sessions where this test might overlap, where this response might overlap, and also similar to internet content. So there are different databases that we use to identify if a text is somewhat suspicious that somebody gave us a response. And so to wind up, I just want to leave you with a few takeaways for responsible AI standards in assessment, which is that we believe they demonstrate professional responsibility. They aid in decision-making to mitigate potential harms of AI for assessment, and they support accountability. But they're not without challenges, of course. And one of the challenges is to keep updating the standards and the practice in step with AI advances and regulation, and to keep, in order to keep the test valid, fair, reliable, and secure. And so with that, the DET Responsible AI Standards, we had a first version last year, and we'll have an update coming up. And here are the references from the talk in case you're interested in doing some more reading. And thank you. And here's a QR code if you want to go to the research page and access the standards or any of our other papers. And thank you very much. And I hope I was respectful of time.
Absolutely, Jill. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was really interesting and a lot of food for thought. We will be opening the floor to discussion a little bit later on once we've heard from Cara. So Cara, over to you.
Very much, Nikki, and thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Cara McWilliams, and I'm just going to give a brief background of myself to provide some context for the comments I'll share today. I am the Vice President of Product Innovation and Development here at ETS. Certainly, I work very closely on our largest programs, TOEFL, TOEIC, GRE, Praxis. I'm also thinking about sort of the future of assessment and where ETS is going with AI-enabled products and services as we move beyond high-stakes standardized assessment toward more diagnostic, formative, ongoing assessment, as well as continuing to support our largest programs. And so Jill did an exceptional job. Very well done, Jill. The DET standards are really, really well done and speak really well to standards for AI, specifically when used in high-stakes standardized assessments. While we adopt the same or similar principles here at ETS, I'm going to focus the conversation a little differently today and talk about extending the principles for ethical and responsible AI into all types of assessment and product development here at ETS. There's going to be a lot of information on these slides as I provide this overview, but happy to share the deck and as you know, you'll have the recording, so hopefully you'll be able to refer to them in the future. So just to kick off, really what we think here at ETS is that user centricity drives responsible product development with ethical AI at its core. Something that I am incredibly passionate about is while I love advanced technology and researching and developing advanced technology, it's not about letting the technology drive the experience. It's really about bringing advanced technology together with the best of what we know about how people learn and are assessed and delivering it in a meaningful user experience. And so if we're constantly keeping the user at the core, we can use AI as a tool to enable those principles. So at ETS, when we think about extending responsible and ethical AI principles, we're really thinking about it like this. And Jill actually made a great point during her comments, which is responsible and ethical principles have been around for an incredibly long time, and not just for standardized assessments, though certainly we abide by the standards, but there have been responsible and ethical product development principles that have been around for quite some time also. So we think about it in terms of responsible product development being the largest circle, as you can see here, and then in the context of responsible assessment development, and then with responsible AI at the core. We believe that when AI models are valid, reliable, fair, and implemented to enhance learning science principles and meet user needs, they can support educational goals that assessment products, both summative and formative, are meant to achieve. When we started to develop our standards for responsible and ethical AI, which will be published later this year, we started to think about these different constructs. So what responsible AI is, what responsible assessment development is, and what responsible product development is. A number of literature reviews were done to really define each of these things. And what we saw when we started to define them is that there's so much overlap between how people are thinking and researching and talking about responsible AI, responsible assessment development, and responsible product development. We hear a lot of themes like transparency, fairness, equity, privacy protection, minimizing harm, really thinking about positive societal impacts. And in all of the lit reviews that were conducted, we kept seeing the same theme of coming back to user centricity and users being at the core. And I think Jill spoke to this really articulately with human-centered AI. And it really is the same when we're thinking across these different constructs. So we started to define, and then we realized that responsible AI is not mutually exclusive from these other areas. In fact, each of these areas is mutually reinforcing and supportive. So that started to lead to the development of how we were thinking about the standards. We realized that there were these themes among these constructs, but then there were also dimensions among each of the constructs as well. So ranging from highly theoretical to highly practical, 7 dimensions started to emerge across responsible product development, responsible assessment development, and responsible AI. The dimensions that we thought were most important to be forefront in the standards are transparency, explainability, and accountability, privacy and security, fairness and bias mitigation, equity and inclusion, educational impact and integrity, continuous improvement, and global impact. Now, these might not seem incredibly novel to you. A lot of product organizations are talking about these dimensions, including Microsoft and Google. What's really special and interesting about the way that ETS is thinking about these dimensions and thinking about them in terms of ethical and responsible AI standards is looking at them from a holistic product development perspective, putting them in the context of assessment, both standardized, high stakes standardized, and low and mid stakes formative, and then thinking about how it's enabled by responsible AI. And again, to remind you, always enabled by responsible AI and not driven by the technology. So I won't read all of the definitions of the dimensions that we have defined and are thinking about at ETS. But again, it won't really surprise you. When we think about transparency, for example, it's all about clear communication of processes, making sure that the outcomes of specific products or assessments are being communicated openly and honestly. Privacy, we want to safeguard users. We want to mitigate bias in any way that we can. We want to focus on equal opportunities for users, regardless of their backgrounds. Educational impact and integrity is one that is incredibly important to me because it really defines making sure that any technology you're implementing is aligned with educational objectives. And then, of course, speaking to all of the high quality psychometric properties that Jill touched on, as well as what we refer to as at ETS as an efficacy narrative. When we think about an efficacy narrative, it is developing developing insights that we can make and claims that we can make from the beginning of the product development lifecycle or assessment development lifecycle. That includes any AI that we're incorporating in any of our products and services. And then certainly continuous improvement, ongoing refinement based on feedback, and then global impact. Global impact is one that I think is important because this is one that we're not seeing in many of the standards that we've been reviewing. When we think about global impact, we're thinking about it in two ways. One, we know that responsible and ethical AI standards will only be appropriately developed if it is global collaboration and we're reaching across the world to make sure that we're collaborating with scientists, with vendors, with industry, to make sure that we're working together toward achieving the same goal. But then secondly, global impact is also about how our development, application, and implementation of AI is impacting our environment. And that is something that's critically important when we're thinking about our AI standards. How are we reducing our carbon footprint on the Earth and still driving innovative R&D? So these are the 7 dimensions that we are really using as the basis for how we're thinking about standards for responsible and ethical AI. I'm not going to dive into each of them, but I want to look at them and talk a little bit about how we're thinking about them across the different constructs. So thinking about transparency, explainability, and accountability. If we think about responsible product development, it's about sharing publicly the co-design process that was followed, including the makeup of the co-design team and any gaps that there were in that team. That becomes about inclusivity, as well as ensuring that you're communicating with the community who was involved in the product development process. This is not dissimilar from thinking about responsible assessment development. When you're implementing a responsible assessment development processes, you're fostering transparency, detailing the development, evaluation criteria, and intended uses of the results. So then, if we drill down and think about responsible AI, it's ensuring that the AI systems, including their training data and processes, are designed to be comprehensible and interpretable through clear external-facing documentation, as it was applied to that assessment development for the product you were developing. So again, the responsible AI is not mutually exclusive from these other principles that we are applying. If we think about privacy and security, the overarching goal is safeguarding users while providing supportive educational environments. The same principles hold true when we're starting from the outermost circle of product development. So an example of this would be something like providing terms and conditions which clearly state how users' data are being collected, managed, and used. This applies to AI and other components of the product. But when we're thinking about it specifically related to assessment, it's making sure participants provide informed consent, they understand the assessment's purposes and potential risks. And then if we drill down even further to the core of the offering, which is responsible AI powering that assessment and that product, it's about employing proper protocols for collecting, storing, managing, and handling data in a responsible manner. Again, independent from the other 2 principles, but mutually reinforcing to ensure that the entirety of the assessment and the product are responsible and ethical. When we're thinking about fairness and bias mitigation, overarching, it's ensuring ethical treatment while promoting inclusivity and mitigating discrimination. From the product development perspective, it's respecting and incorporating diverse cultural perspectives into product design and content. Responsible assessment development, striving to include diverse perspectives. And then when we get to responsible AI, an example might be pairing generative AI with personalization filters that were developed during that product development process. So in the product development process during co-design, we may have learned more about the backgrounds, perspectives, and cultures of the users who are using our products and our assessments. And then when we're developing our generative AI paired with our personalization filters, those personalization filters are built based on that co-design process. So again, independent but mutually reinforcing of the entire process. Equity and inclusion will come as no surprise that it's really about including everyone in your populations into the product development, assessment development, and development of responsible AI. So have you considered all subgroups when you have been in the design process, even if they are in the minority and require extra consideration? Are assessments available to all of those individuals that were included in the product development process? And then, does the distribution of training data producers accurately mirror the end user's demographic? When thinking about educational impact and integrity, again, it's about ensuring the quality of the scores that are being developed based on our assessments, but not only that. When we move past standardized assessments and think about diagnostic formative assessments, are the insights that we are providing based on the AI technology powering our solutions being interpreted in a way that are being revealed to a user that they can accurately understand what we're asking them to do next, or what we're recommending is the best next course of action for them to reach their intended outcomes? And is the AI that's powering those solutions valid, reliable, fair, so that we know that the insights that we're giving users based on the inferences that our technology is making accurate and appropriate for them? When thinking about continuous improvement, as Jill mentioned, it's incredibly appropriate that we're continuing to improve the way that we think about responsible and ethical AI standards, but also, are we continuing to improve how they're being implemented in our products and services? How we're evaluating the scoring models in TOEFL, how we are reviewing the content that's automatically being generated for our highest stakes assessments and for our low and mid stakes personalized assessments. Do those evaluations look different? And what we're finding is that they do. So it's about continuously improving all of the processes associated with products, services, high, low, mid-stakes assessments that are leveraging AI as a tool. And finally, global impact. Here, as I mentioned, it's really about acknowledging the interconnectedness of our world to address global challenges collaboratively. And those global challenges extend beyond just what is the latest technology, how have we advanced it, what is the research, what is the development. It's about how are we ensuring to protect the globe while we are conducting that research and development. So that's a core component of our principles. So just to give you something to take away that I think is incredibly important is that responsible AI, as we're thinking about it at ETS, is really an enabler to a user-centric ethical tool or solution. Ethical and responsible AI principles in isolation are important, but don't tell the complete story of user centricity. In absence of broader assessment and product development context, they can be incomplete. And they should sit at the core of other considerations when a solution using AI when AI is enabling a solution. These principles inside of the circle in responsible AI should focus specifically on model building, application, and evaluation, which our scientists here at ETS are doing an incredible job of. But we want to make sure that all of those models are being leveraged in the best context possible. And in fact, the way that we've been thinking about it at ETS is that when an assessment organization has a long history of responsible and ethical assessment development like ETS does, and has implemented really responsible and ethical product development efforts over the last 5 years, incorporating AI principles into those standards is not difficult. They can actually be incorporated seamlessly because you've already focused on the user. User-centric product development captures the objectives of responsible and ethical AI, and assessment practices that follow proven standards add important context. And then responsible AI principles ensure that AI-enabled assessments and other products remain ethical. So what we're thinking about here at ETS is that through the integration of responsible AI, we enhance our principled approach to assessment and product development, strengthening our commitment to the users we serve. But in fact, it's really the technology that's new, and it's the tool that's new that's being used in these solutions and assessments the principles have always been there. It's about how we're applying these new technologies to those proven principles in product and assessment development. So thank you very much for hearing a little bit about how ETS is thinking about responsible and ethical AI. And Nikki, I will hand it back to you for hopefully some conversation.
Thanks, Cara. And yeah, really interesting, and actually some really interesting thoughts there around actually the principles are already there. It's just actually about the tools that we're using now. Okay, so we did have a question in from John, which was specifically for Jill. That Jill had mentioned a document in the press about responsible AI assessment, and Jill's responded to that with regards to the chapter being available in a couple of months. So Pat, I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and come in?
I am going to come on the screen. So first of all, thank you very much for that. I think it was well organised, Nikki, and I really find it interesting about the opportunities AI has, but sometimes we forget about the responsibility bit. Now, obviously, we've got organisations that are big organisations, both in terms of Duolingo and ETS, who are able to act responsibly and do these things. Now, obviously, that's not always within the remit of every organisation to do that, or indeed should it be? So is it up to the test sponsor, the test owners, which obviously ETS and Duolingo are, or should it be something that's done centrally via a national or international organisation? What are your thoughts about that?
Sure, I can start. That's a good question, and it's something that we've been thinking about. And part of the reason that we did the standards is because there was nothing out there that addressed, comprehensively all of the types of AI that tests are using now, right? And so the bigger question is, I think the answer is yes. For organizations that are large and they have time and resources to build responsible AI standards, of course, they should be doing that. I also think that the responsible AI standards that are being built by organizations should help to inform the standards for the community, right? And so I think that the ARA, APA, and CME standards, I think there's now discussion about updating them. And I think that the larger professional organizations should be looking to see kind of what's out there right now to help inform their own standards. And I think as well, organizations should be looking at all of the literature that's coming out of policy, that's coming out of government. Governments all over the world have responsible AI standards now, or standards or guidelines or blueprints for responsible AI. There was, ever since ChatGPT came out, there's just been a proliferation of content and literature that I think we should all be looking at, and at least what's in your country, if that's what you can do. But I think the idea of looking around the world and seeing what's out there is really important. And I think it's everybody's responsibility who has their toe in the water, basically.
Yeah, I agree, Jill. I think that's why global collaboration and global impact is so important. It is by looking at all of those standards that are out there, seeing where the alignment is, and making sure that we're sharing information. And then, as we think about transparency, it's about publicly sharing this information. I think Duolingo is doing a great job with that, with their standards, and making sure that the community has access to all of the great work that's already being done. I'd love to see, as I mentioned in my talk, have publicly available standards that extend beyond sort of standardized assessment, more toward classroom assessment and other assessments, which I think is coming, but will take a lot of collaboration and coordination.
Great, Cara, thanks. Has anybody else got any comments they'd maybe like to throw in as well around, should we have a global framework?
Well, I'm going to answer that one as well, because I should have said I'm the CEO of the Assessment Association, and I have had conversations with people about this before. So if people are willing, we're more than happy as the eAA to be able to get involved in this, to be able to act as a conduit for information. So obviously the information that's being shared on this call, we're more than happy to share via our website, and obviously people that have attended the session. But any ideas that people have got of things that they want to do, they want to get involved with, and how we can support, we're more than willing to do that. I'm going to ask another question now. I know we're talking about fairness. Do we have to accept, this is my personal opinion rather than anything else, so that's a disclaimer. because obviously these large language models are built on data, and the data that's available has probably got inbuilt bias, particularly the generative AI models, because it's all the information that's on the internet that by definition is biased because it's certain, it's English that tends to be created in, because it's not trained in other languages. Do we just have to accept that it is biased and we just have to address it? Because of course people are biased, people marking essays, humans are biased, etc., because of your experiences and background. Do we have to accept that it is biased and then just try and limit it as much as possible? Or is that too oversimplistic?
My view is, it's unfortunate to say we have to accept that it's biased, but I think we have to be knowledgeable that it is biased. And I think that's the point that you're making. And nothing that is happening right now is going to mitigate that bias completely. So my view is acknowledge that it's biased, understand, and then mitigate it as much as you can as you're using it and implementing it.
I agree with all of that. And I think that we also in the assessment community, and I think this is where multi-stakeholder collaboration comes in, is that we have to stay really aware of the research that's out there. There is a lot of research going on right now about mitigating bias. There's a lot of attention to it. We need to sort of pay attention to all the channels and how it's being dealt with. And you have to understand the tools that you're working with, and you have to make decisions about what's acceptable and what's not, and how you're going to I think one of the ways, making sure that you use people in the loop to make sure that things are in good shape. And bias means different things to different people. So it's a very tricky question. But I think, in addition to what everybody said, is that just making sure that you understand what's in your tool and also what's being done to mitigate bias in the tools that you're using and in general.
The other thing I'll say is that, we often talk about bias in the tools and things like that, but it's also important to remember that there are many ways that AI can enable equity and reduce bias by offering opportunities that aren't available without AI. So thinking about the development of socioculturally responsive assessment items that couldn't be generated in quite the way that they could before AI. So, certainly we need to remain aware and vigilant of the bias, but also remember the, opportunity we have to promote equity.
Absolutely, it's a really good point, Cara, that yes, it can be used to eliminate the bias, but we need to continue to have that human loop there, won't we? So, essentially, that's really important. Prasitha's asked, do you think going forward that AI should integrate nuances and understand the flexibility of human thinking in marking assessments? Will it actually be able to check critical thinking skills in any way?
If I understand the question correctly, or at least the last part of it was, do we think that AI will be able to signal critical thinking skills? My view, and a lot of the work that we're doing here at ETS, is around.
I run it down because it's really expensive. So I have a replacement there for it.
So a lot of the work that we're doing at ETS is around the development of assessments that measure durable skills or transferable skills, such as critical thinking, collaboration. What we're finding in the research that we're doing is that it's really about the data creation that's important, as well as the signaling. So to the extent that we can create experiences that allow for naturally occurring data to really measure those skills, the AI behind it becomes, it certainly can score it. And we're finding that there is some validity between the AI scores that are being scored and what humans would score. And so I think there's huge potential for AI being able to score some of these durable skills. But a point that Jill made in her talk that I think is incredibly important is that a lot of the AI that's being used to score these or provide marks on these durable skills is multimodal AI, leveraging things like video. And we think about bias mitigation. And so the implementation of multimodal AI is something that I think requires a lot more research, but has a huge potential to be able to score skills like that.
Thanks, Cara. Jill, any thoughts?
Yes, I'm thinking about this. I mean, I think that to some extent, AI is already scoring some critical thinking skills and assessments, because if you think about it, I mean, when test takers are responding to the kinds of prompts for writing or speaking that involve argumentation or persuasion. There's critical thinking involved in that, right? And I know ETS, and I know, of course, the Duolingo English test has those kinds of prompts, and the technology and the features that you use in order to score those do capture to some extent critical thinking, right? It's in the rubric, right? And so I think that in the same way that we score production responses, writing and speaking, we could leverage the technology to do the same thing for critical thinking. It may be a bit more of a challenge, but I think that's definitely a direction that I think society is going, is wanting to make sure that the types of items that we use on exams, the future of testing, it sort of taps into more complex thinking. So yeah, I think that is something that we'll do. I think it will involve people. I think the human in the loop concept is really important. We can't get rid of it. And as long as we keep our rubrics and our training of people very rigorous, then I think that we should be in good shape. And it's definitely the road forward, the future of testing.
Absolutely. Pat, you've come back on screen. Do you want
Yeah,
to
I was going to ask another question actually as a follow on to that. Sorry, other people, please feel free to interject. I made this the last one. So obviously, we're just talking about critical thinking. I think the opportunity open for AI multimodal scoring is just absolutely huge in terms of the use cases. What is going to be the limitation in terms of what it can do? Is it going to be organizations worrying that someone's going to sue them, there's going to be a class action or whatever? What are the barriers, or is it literally the technology, the world's our oyster, we can do whatever we like? What's going to be the limitation?
Are you asking the limitation of moving into
technology, what we can do with it? What's going to limit it? Is it our imagination, or is it actually the fact that someone's frightened they're going to get sued by someone or something like that?
I mean, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, Carrie. Did you start?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like any. I mean, I think we have to think about it like any assessment, right? I mean, every assessment for every test, you're going to have to make a validity argument. And if you can make that validity argument, then you should be in reasonably good shape. If you can make sure that the construct that the item that you're developing meets, matches the construct, and that, it generalizes to other skill sets, and that, you can explain. I mean, explainability is really important. You can explain how it's being scored. I mean, if it's too much of a black box, it may just be beyond people's thresholds. And then you have to be able to make that validity argument and prove that that item, or that the items on that test, are usable for their intended purpose, as we, from the sort of traditional validity argument. And I think from that perspective, and then we need to do that. And then, because we're using AI, I mean, the same way we did 20 years ago with just automated writing evaluation, you have a lot of people who, it's new and there's a lot of fear, but you have to do the research. You have to be able to explain it. You have to be able to show that it's okay. You have to apply responsible AI and not just say that you're doing it, but you actually have to do it, write about it, make it transparent. And I think then the dust will fall as it will, right? But as long as you can, I guess, as long as you can make the validity argument for the test, the items on the test, and you can show that you're you're administering responsibly, then, like I said, the dust will fall as it will. I mean, there may be things at the end of the day that just are not going to work out, but I think you have to do your due diligence and see what happens.
And what we're finding when we are doing kind of pilot testing and user testing of some of these new experiences, an example I'll provide is around confidence is one of the skills that we are looking to measure. And we have these modules and we're working with states. And in an experience, if the student's video is turned on and they're talking, we can provide a much stronger signal of confidence. But the users or the decision makers are saying, well, we want our students to have agency and have choice. So can you still provide us measures of their confidence in some other way if they don't want to share their camera? And then we can use only their speech to provide measures of confidence. And maybe that measure won't be as strong as if we had sort of the video signals. But I think it comes down to what the use is of the assessment. These states are thinking about using these type of skill-based assessment for different things, and then making sure that we can provide agency and we can provide choice and still be able to measure the skills that we say we're going to measure. And that is hard work, and it is pushing our scientists. But I think it's really, and it's one of our principles, our standards, is for making sure that if there is multimodal data collection, that users have choice with which data are being collected from them, and can we still provide the signals we can with those data. And I see that in the short term, but in the long term, I'm very optimistic about where we're going.
John, you mentioned in the chat, just going back to the sort of global frameworks, you mentioned that you sort of felt that organizations will have a lot of different needs, the example being education versus certification. Do you want to share a little bit?
Yes, just briefly. So I think that like, for example, in education, there might be concerns about safeguarding students, which isn't really a concern in certification, or in smaller organizations will definitely have different challenges to larger ones, like global impact isn't something that a lot of organizations will be concerned about, but I can see why ETS might be concerned about that. Also, I think in talent assessment in the workplace, there are different considerations. So I do think it'll be a bit of a pick and mix type thing when you're coming up with your own internal policies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I guess, in that sense, rather than it necessarily being a global framework, it might be global guidelines that people then sort of adapt to their business and the requirements of their business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be quite complicated. I mean, the ATP, we've got an AI subcommittee, which Paul Muir is on as well. We're trying to look at making a list of topics, and we've come up with over 30 different topics that people might choose from. But sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly not going to be simplistic, is it, in any way? And I think, as we've seen from the work that Jill and Cara are doing, it isn't simplistic. There's got to be a lot of thought process put into it. But I think, it's very much something that is absolutely needed. First of all, Cara, Jill, thank you so much for coming on and presenting to us today. And both presentations are really, really engaging. And thank you for sitting there and then being grilled by Pat for at least 15 minutes. So very, very much appreciated. So a couple of things that are being popped into the chat for you. One is a survey. Please, can you fill it in and give us feedback on how you feel this first special interest group went, and let us know if there are any topics that you would like covering off at the next session. We have got a provisional date in for the 16th of July, which will be shared with you. We've obviously got the conference coming up in June. There's a link to the conference and the awards in the chat as well. And so if I can encourage you to have a look at that, and hopefully we can have a bit more discussion at the symposium that we'll be having prior to the conference. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. Hope you enjoyed the session. I certainly did, and I've taken copious notes. So thank you again to Cara and Jill.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you. Have a good day.